And then we're ready. So welcome everyone. I'm excited to have Karina here with me. We were just talking. She moved back to England about what, three months ago from Costa Rica?
Yeah, that's right.
Just settling in when the crisis hits, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. Timed it right. Although my husband arrived almost 2 weeks before lockdown, so that was pretty close.
Just in time, I'd say.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
Better 2 weeks early than 2 weeks later, I would say. Yeah, welcome again, everyone, to this third episode of Sellics Thursday Live. Sellics Thursday Live is a weekly show that we do every Thursday in which we invite Amazon industry experts to discuss strategies and tactics on how to successfully sell on Amazon. Last week, we talked a lot about how the supply chain is affected by Corona, and you can go on YouTube and check it out. We also have the podcast for this, so feel free to listen to last week's episode. And today I'm excited to have Karina with me. Karina is a longtime Amazon veteran in some way. So Karina has been at Amazon and as part of the vendor management team for many years. And so since then, she's built up her own agency and her own community also. I'm sure she will tell us a bit more about this. Karina, do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for having me on the show today. So yes, I'm a bit... makes me feel a bit old, really. I've been in the Amazon space for over 15 years now. So seen a lot happen, a lot change. I spent 7 years working for Amazon in vendor management in the UK, and then have spent the last 8 years working with sellers and vendors, helping them grow their business on Amazon across North America and Europe. And so now I have an agency, a consulting and retail agency where we help sellers and vendors grow their business. And there's a small team of us, a team of 12, a number of us ex-Amazonian as well, and helping our clients with expertise from almost both sides of the fence. And also have another business as well, Vendor Society, which is where we have a community of vendors over between about 250, 300 vendors across the globe, where we sort of connect with one another and share experiences with what's going on, especially times like these. That community always helps.
That is, yeah, that is great. I think it's the only vendor community that I'm aware of, vendor society. So I think that's very exciting, and it's essentially peer to peer, right? So it's vendors helping each other. It's obviously, I guess, you support as well, but it's more on a community aspect, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's gone from a lot of different stages since it was originally launched, but now we have really the product itself is monthly virtual roundtables where vendors are on the call sharing their experiences, and it's a time where actually I keep quiet a lot of the time, which is often quite hard for me, and facilitate those discussions.
All right, fantastic. So today we want to talk about vendors and hybrids, and specifically how vendors are affected by the Corona crisis, right? Karina obviously is working with vendors and sellers, but due to her background on the vendor side, we thought that it makes sense to focus specifically on vendors and hybrids. So by hybrids we mean brands that have a vendor account and also a seller account, right? A strategy that I think is getting more and more popular. And so how those vendors, so customers that have a 1P business, how they've been affected by the Corona crisis so far. So today is April 9th, right? 2020. It is essentially week 3 or 4 of most of the national lockdowns, right? So I think Germany is in week 4 now, UK probably week 3 or something. The US depends on the region, also somewhere in that range, right? Things are changing obviously on a weekly basis, if not on a daily basis. Nonetheless, obviously, I think there are some patterns and some trends that have emerged. Karina, what have you seen so far happening in the vendor community?
In the vendor community, I mean, it's very similar to the seller community, with this point where Amazon turned around and all of a sudden nobody was receiving any purchase orders. And Amazon being Amazon, unfortunately, there doesn't always come an announcement. The announcement comes after the panic, when people realize that there's no purchase orders being raised, or in some instances, some clients actually received huge purchase orders that made them panic, almost as if to say, these kind of purchase orders are going to put us out of stock, because no one was really sort of at that point in time. They sort of realized that there were initial stages of lockdown, but didn't really understand the extent of what was really happening. And so first of all, it was very much the vendors in certain product categories not receiving those purchase orders, and then Amazon making that announcement and then being a lot more clearer when that announcement came out on seller, which was very much around the FBA shipments only being able to raise for non-essentials. And they then said the same on vendor, as in, we're sending out purchase orders on the essentials, but the non-essentials, you may see a delay or you might not see any purchase orders at all. Right. And so very much you then sort of see this announcement across the board. Now that's changed over the weeks. Some businesses have seen, as I said, some have seen a surge in orders and continue to see a surge. So with the panic thinking that that's going to put them in a position where Amazon's stockpiling or overstock, in actual fact, the demand had increased. So they're seeing the sales in surge, but they're also seeing sales out surge as well. But then you've also had businesses that had no purchase orders, but some of those that had no purchase orders and almost went into a state of panic of, we're not receiving any orders, we haven't for the last few weeks. We have seen, and from conversations with vendors this week, a lot more purchase orders coming in. Some are not necessarily as high and not for the wider selection, but we've definitely seen things shift in the last week.
Okay, that's good news, I guess, for many vendors out there. Do you know any vendor that still hasn't received any purchase orders since the announcement? I think the announcement was around the 20th of March, right? So yeah, about 20 days ago. Anyone that hasn't seen any POs at all since then?
Yeah, there's still some clients that haven't received purchase orders. And so, which is a shame, but what we've heard from the recent announcement is where Amazon previously were categorizing. So they were saying essentials, non-essentials, and you could see a rise in categories such as grocery, personal care, even homeschooling and crafts. Those sort of categories grow.
Right.
There's now a point where Amazon are ordering, but they're ordering on almost a product by product basis. And so the recent announcement is more about customer demand. So sort of putting my Amazon hat on and how they look at that really is, if they're seeing a lot of customers clicking on products and lots of eyeballs on one product, they're going to see, okay, we might not necessarily see that as an essential product, but customers are wanting it. Maybe it's barbecues, for example, all of a sudden, or some kind of garden products, but they're starting to look at what customers are looking for and ordering based on that, but also down to their capacity, because of course they're going to have resource constraints. They've got social distancing measures in their fulfillment centers and everything. So at the same time, they can't just all of a sudden quickly ramp up, but definitely some people are. It's just harder, I guess, if you're a new vendor right now and you've got new products with no previous history or that much customer demand or glance views. That's the challenge.
Yeah, so I think that's a behavior that we saw change as well. So instead of going category by category, following the demand essentially, which I guess is a reasonable approach, right? Because I mean, why would Amazon know exactly which categories are in need right now, right? You just leave it to a customer, which I guess is in line with Amazon's customer centricity. So I think that this is definitely the case. So if I understand you correctly, there are essentially two types of outcomes. So some customers or some vendors that receive a lot less POs, if no POs at all, right? And some that receive a ton of POs. So let's go through those two cases and let's discuss how, what can you do if you fall into the one or the other bucket as a vendor if you're in that position, right? So let's maybe start with so that we can end on a positive note, right? Let's start with the ones that have been receiving less POs over the past couple of weeks, right? Yeah. So first of all, have you also seen that the products really went out of stock then, or has it just been a situation where there were a bunch of units in stock and demand was low for the past couple of weeks? So while there were no POs issues, the sellout side was still happening, or was it really to a point where you know, the products were not available to be purchased anymore on Amazon?
Yeah, it's a mix really, because a lot depends on also the weeks of cover Amazon had on certain brands. So Amazon doesn't have a set weeks of cover for every single vendor, as in it's not the same. It takes into account, for example, lead time as well. And so you might find that one vendor is okay because they had a higher weeks of cover, but other vendors not so much. They might have had a lower weeks of cover on certain products. Also, it might be that they actually had an increase in demand, but because it was deemed as a non-essential category, Amazon didn't immediately purchase that inventory as well, which is a bit tough because customers were buying it, but Amazon was saying, okay, this isn't our priority right now.
Right.
And so some businesses still have stock and some have gone out of stock. But interestingly, some vendors that have gone out of stock have started to sell the stock that they probably have wanted to shift for ages, but it hasn't shifted because they've always had their key sellers. So a lot is down to almost weeks of cover and whether or not that vendor saw an increase in demand despite Amazon not prioritizing that category at that point in time.
Yeah. Okay. But so essentially, I mean, this should be better now, right? So from now on, as they don't go by categories anymore, when they see that some products are low on stock, this is probably when they will issue then a purchase order, right? But so if I'm a vendor now, right, and I was unfortunate to be in the wrong category for some time, right, and even though now that, you know, the definition is getting a bit more broad, I still see a lot less POs that I'm used to, right?
Mm-hmm.
What can I do?
Yeah, really the question here and the real impact is supply, is that you as a vendor are dependent on Amazon to be able to supply the customer on Amazon, and you need those purchase orders. But you can't dictate to Amazon, what they order, and you can't tell Amazon when to order. And so there are many vendors sitting there, probably looking into their systems every day, thinking when that purchase order is coming, and it doesn't come, or it has come and it's half the size, or we've even seen Amazon cancel orders from bulk orders and so forth in the past when they've decided that they no longer want those products. So really, when it comes to supply, because they're waiting, how long do you wait, right? Because you could be waiting some time, but whilst you're waiting, your business is put at risk. There's a point of you've got loss of sales, people are losing their jobs, people are being put on furlough, you end up with this surplus amount of stock. There's so many different things that are happening. And so it's really about what are the other channels available for you to sell. So not being dominant or not being dependent, solely waiting for Amazon to place those orders. So what are the other options? The other options, of course, if you're solely a vendor, if you have a direct fulfillment setup where you can send product direct to consumer, that can be an option. But the challenge there is you need to have that all set up. It's not like you can just switch it on. And there are many businesses that haven't had the opportunity to even get that set up. So that is one option, but not an option for everyone. The other option is where you mentioned at the start, hybrid. Some businesses have a hybrid setup. And those that have had a hybrid setup are probably very relieved that they have that setup, because it's almost a backup. It's a backup for them for inventory. As in, if Amazon isn't ordering any inventory, they can then sell that product on the seller side. And then if they sell it on the seller side, they have two options. Of course, there's a fulfillment by Amazon. Now, we know with fulfillment by Amazon, that's almost a bit of a scenario that you have on vendor, where, again, is that gate open for you to send in inventory? It might be closed, it might be open, or you might have already had some inventory there. If not, you can then do what we call fulfilled by merchant. So they could just do fulfill those products direct to consumer from their own warehouse. Now, again, a lot depends on a vendor's setup. A lot of the time, these vendors are wholesale setup. They're not set up necessarily for direct to consumer orders. So that's when things become a challenge, because if a business doesn't have that setup, it's not that they can just turn around and start fulfilling orders to customers, right? And also some of them have resource constraints. So if all of those, you know, I talk to vendors and say, well, these are your options, etc., and it's like none of those are going to work, then is there somebody that can sell for you? Are there, because there are some really great sellers, resellers out there that could take that inventory from that vendor and sell on their behalf. Now, of course, that reseller is going to not just want that temporary, in the sense like, oh yeah, as soon as you get your vendor order, you drop us. There's going to be some sort of agreement there, but that is an option. If it comes to a point where you're just not getting any orders, you need to sell the stock, then that's definitely an option as well. And I've even seen that on LinkedIn and out there, where there are resellers calling out to vendors saying, look, if you guys have stock and you can't get it to the customer, we can do it. That's our expertise. So it's almost like finding, if it's not working at the moment and you know your product can sell on Amazon, trying to find those experts that can do the job right now. And this is where we all need to reach out and sort of change our way of thinking almost, because the dynamics have changed. So how can we change with it? So there's lots of different options, but of course it depends again on the vendor's setup.
But it also sounds like there's at least one option for everyone, right? It's not that no one can do. I mean, there's some vendors that cannot do business in any way, right? So there is, yeah. I mean, on a high level, either you can do the direct to consumer yourself, then you could use the drop shipping through vendor, or you could use the merchant fulfillment by opening up a seller account, right? Mm-hmm. Or if you cannot do this, you find someone that can do it. Yeah. And that's fairly quick. So if we think about finding someone that can do this, do you have any recommendation of how people should search for this? Is it easy to find? I mean, or is it difficult? Like, what would be your approach? Is it just a Google search?
Almost a Google search and a LinkedIn search. But also, I mean, you often have, most manufacturers will probably have some knowledge of distributors or wholesalers in their field.
Yeah.
And they probably are already dealing with some distributors, because a lot of manufacturers will have distributors and wholesalers supplying the smaller retailers already. So you might already have a distributor or wholesaler that you can call on. Alternatively, you might have a retailer that you know already that's selling on Amazon as well. So, but yeah, if you don't have any of that, it is very much a bit of a Google and LinkedIn search. But there are companies out there. You just want to make sure you get almost, if you're in grocery, going for someone that's quite experienced with grocery, because then you're dealing with expiration dated product. Although grocery isn't necessarily an impacted category, because that is one of what they call essentials. So trying to find someone that has sort of some knowledge in that industry helps. But at the same time, you know, just finding someone that at least has that experience and the capabilities to ship that product on your behalf. And also one thing to mention on the seller side as an option, one thing, and this is, I'm not sure of the answer right now, is for those that don't actually have a seller account, how quick is it at the moment to open a seller account? Because the amount of inquiries we've had this week of people going, I want to set up a seller account, I want to do this. I can just see that there's this influx all of a sudden of people wanting to open seller accounts, but then Amazon have to verify the seller accounts and everything. So there could end up with a backlog there as well, in the number of people wanting to become a seller now.
Right. I mean, I think that's happening for sure. I think setting up the seller account is probably even the easier part of it, right? It's having the logistics, and I mean, you know, I mean, we can talk about this actually. So, I mean, those are the alternatives. I mean, first of all, I would agree that typically there are these distributors that are more or less category specific. There are some very big ones that you probably find very easily if you Google, but then there are also some more category specific ones. So I do think it's a fairly established industry. So typically lead times also, we don't talk about months until this is up and running. Specifically, I think indeed these days, you know, they probably have an incentive to do this quickly, right? So I think there is a way for every vendor that if they really want to, they can get their products out and to the end consumer, right? But so picking up on what you just said before, so that's the alternative essentially. if you either have the direct to consumer already in place or you don't, right? But what about those, or let me ask this differently. Is this a good time to start your own direct to consumer business if you don't have any operations in place? I mean, what do you need to do to start direct to consumer? And is this the right time to do it?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I could turn around and say, yes, it is a good time because there's opportunity, right? Because some people don't have that setup. But is it the right time to build that setup? Because if we're all in lockdown, most of us, you're not really in a position to start going around finding a place to hold your inventory, or, you know, you would need to have, and how do you get those shipments out? You need to start having those conversations with the different logistics companies. But logistics companies, what are their priorities at the moment? Are their priorities bringing on new clients, or are their priorities just to get product to the customer right now? So you start running into lots of other constraints, as well, as in when you want to start setting something up now, a lot of time people are just focused on current clients and just dealing with current business, because everybody's under constraint in terms of resource a lot of the time as well.
So in normal times, do you have any experience how long this process takes? Let's say I'm a vendor, I only do wholesale so far, and then I start a direct to consumer. Do you have any experience how long that typically takes in normal times, when, you know, there are no crazy times like now?
If a vendor decided to go direct to consumer, I guess, again, it depends on their setup. So some of them might already have a warehouse that's able to do that. So they can set up a seller account, get all their products listed and start fulfilling those orders direct to consumer. If they haven't got the setup, it really depends. It depends on the size of their business and the volume, because a lot of the time they're going to need the software and the systems to read what inventory they have currently in their warehouse, to be able to then update the inventory in Seller Central. And when an order comes, they're going to want the systems. They're not going to be, a lot of these businesses are used to volume on the vendor side. They'd want that volume on the seller side. They need to have the systems in place. It's not really going to be a manual process. So I would say the integration of it all is what would take time. And I guess that seems to be often when I talk often to vendors, and they all go, right, I want to try Seller. And we're like, well, you can just set up an account and go for it. But then you hear, well, it's easier said than done. You know, our systems aren't necessarily the most up to date. It works really well getting bulk orders. We're just not set up, and we need to integrate our own internal systems, our accounting systems. And I just say systems here because I'm not very technical. So integrating systems is as far as I go. But I also know that there is with the ordering system and everything. So that can be a bit of a complication. And sometimes also, then there's the customer side of things, where a lot of these businesses don't necessarily deal with the end consumer in terms of responding to the customer, because they just sort of send inventory to your major retailers, your Amazon or your Tesco or other large retailers, let's say in the UK, that they don't actually have to have that customer interaction. So they don't have that customer service department. Their customer is a retailer, and it's a different kind of relationship. So
I mean,
it's quite complicated, because it really so much depends on the infrastructure and size of that vendor as to how quick they can move. And it's often those smaller vendors that can move quicker than the larger ones.
Yeah, I mean, I think I totally agree with this, right? There are often some hidden traps that you're not necessarily aware of when you start, right? How do you handle returns? How do you handle customer support, right? Is there even an email address where customers can reach out to? Who's answering? What about taxation, right? If you're in the US and you have sales tax, right? And so, I mean, a bunch of questions that arise suddenly when you go from B2B to B2C, essentially. And so I think I'm not aware of any vendor that really pulled it off in, let's say, 4 weeks or so, right? So I think it's typically a project of, I mean, we talk about, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, depending on, again, how fast they move, right? But so it takes a couple of months, right? It's not something that you decide now and you have up and running next week, typically, right?
Yeah.
I think so. One of the ideas, and that's from our conversation that I had last week with Jérôme, right, was the idea of, well, if you want to start and you want to start small, then start with your top 5 items or so on the seller side, and so at least you have your high velocity items up and running. You don't necessarily need to start with your entire catalog. You can also just start with your top number one item if you even want, right?
Yeah, exactly. You just got to be more strategic with it.
There are a bunch of questions coming in already. So guys, keep the questions coming. We will make sure to answer all of them, right? But before we do this, Karina, is there anything else when we talk about this group of vendors that are receiving less POs? Any strategies, any tips that you want to share?
The main thing is about supply. Is just, I mean, at the end of the day, you want to get product to the customer. So it's more about what are the options which we've discussed and what option is feasible for you. Now, we have also seen those vendors that aren't receiving POs. Okay, if none of those options work for you, what does that mean? Because you're kind of sitting, you're almost in pause mode, really.
Right.
But what can you do whilst you're in pause mode? Yes, there's a point where we've seen vendors start reducing on advertising, reducing on marketing spend, because they don't want to be spending lots of money if they haven't got products in stock, or even if they have products in stock, increasing the sales and then they end out of stock. So it's almost like keeping it going. But there's other things that can be done. So getting ready for when those orders can come. Now, I actually spoke to a few vendors that have said, you know what, it's not great we haven't got the POs through, but we're taking some time. We're taking some time out. We're going through our catalog. We're optimizing our listings. We haven't had a chance to breathe for a while. And now we're breathing. We're looking at what was working, what wasn't. So although it's not ideal because you need that cash flow coming in, reduce on your advertising spend, start saving, tightening up those budget purse strings there. And then focus on what can you do so when it switches back on and we start getting through the other side, even though we don't know what the other side looks like yet, at least you've been able to sort of reassess where you are and where you want to go. So for those businesses that are listening and thinking, well, I can't do any of that, that's sort of when you need to sort of think, okay, take some time out. And we've spoken with many vendors that have had to do that. And actually it's putting them in a stronger position for the future.
Yeah. So looking at listing optimization, new images, keyword research, right? Maybe setting up the PPC campaigns in the proper way, analyzing, getting familiar with ARA premium and all sorts of reports that are out there, right? And understanding what's been working well, what has not, right? Exactly. There's a great tip. I think that anyone, so now you have a tip for anyone, right? For anyone who is affected in any way, that's great. Yeah, I mean, to make the best out of the situation, right? Even though the situation obviously is not rosy. So switching the focus now. So those are people that are affected, obviously, in a way that is unpleasant, where the POs have dropped. When we think about the other group, so the ones that are suddenly seeing a surge in POs, typically in high demand categories, in the essential categories, right? What are the challenges that those people are experiencing? Or is it just the biggest challenge is counting the revenue? What do they have?
It's interesting because you kind of, it's a positive story, which given current circumstances, it's a bit of a difficult story because, knowing what's happening with others. But the truth is these businesses are seeing this surge. But actually some businesses are struggling with that surge because they hadn't planned it. They hadn't forecasted for it. Some of them don't have the inventory to be able to support that demand. And actually their manufacturers, if they've got some manufacturing plants in Europe, some have even closed, or some are running on skeleton staff, or some don't have as much resource. So manufacturing becomes a bit of a challenge for them to get more supply. So we have seen some businesses, although the orders have come through, not being able to fulfill them. At the same time, we've also seen some businesses see a crazy amount of orders come through, but not being able to fulfill them because of just the resource constraint that they have, that they are social distancing in their warehouse. They have limited resource. And even though Amazon might be a surge for them, if only 20% of their business is based on Amazon and 80% was on retail stores that have closed, that shut down a considerable amount of their business. And some staff have even been put on furlough or aren't working because although Amazon's performing, the large proportion of their business isn't. So so many businesses are going into it, it's affecting them in different ways. But I would say it's great if you've all got all the inventory and the resource. But from conversations that I've had, the biggest challenges are inventory, and then having the sufficient resource. So that the response there is delays in shipments. Now, Amazon is always really strict. They'll charge you for anything, for late shipments, for not responding to POs in 24 hours, everything, the whip is out. But they have sort of started to waive things because they're realizing that those that are getting increase in POs, or even not a surge in POs, are constrained because they just they might not have the resource. And so they need to be aware that it's going to take longer to send those shipments out. And it's interesting how expectations were up here pre-crisis, and now everyone's just like, well, as long as I get it in the end. And so everyone's expectations are realistic in the sense that we know we're going to have to wait for stuff now. And even Amazon Amazon are actually working with vendors now, as opposed to dictating almost.
Well, we'll see if that's gonna last, right?
How long that will last, yeah.
Let's hope so, right? But I think it's fair to acknowledge as well that Amazon is reacting to the feedback in the market, right? And it's not just pushing it through. So if we think about those two limitations, right? So you either have not enough inventory or not enough personnel to handle the load. Mm-hmm. What can you do? So what can you do if you don't have enough inventory? Do you have you seen any successful strategies or tactics to solve this problem?
Yeah, there are a couple of things. Of course, there's looking for an alternate supply, which can be difficult if you've already got your manufacturing processes and everything already organized, that it becomes more of a challenge. But, also thinking about, it depends what you sell, because some stores have actually closed and they've still got inventory on the shelves. So could brands are there product that they need to take back off of these businesses that are struggling, knowing that they can then redistribute that elsewhere? So then helping those businesses that have almost closed, that still have that inventory, and then selling them on. So that is one option. The other option is readjusting what you focus on. So your top seller's gone out of stock. What's your next best seller? Or what's that seller that you've never really pushed before? Because it comes to a point where we're so used to selection. We go on Amazon, we're like, oh, I can choose out these 20 products. So you choose out the 20. If you had to choose out of 5 products, you choose out 5. And even it came to a point where, let's say there were no toilet rolls or pasta in the stores. People were just taking whatever pasta, whatever toilet roll. There was no selection involved. And so it comes to a point almost when we're in this situation that there is less selection. So customers do start buying what's available. And so some businesses then can shift, instead of focusing, or where they've been focusing their ads on their top sellers, changing that strategy, focusing on the products that they actually were probably overstocked of because nobody wanted, and then all of a sudden they did want. So, you can change and focus on different products. So those are 2 ways in what you can do. And then there's also, increasing selection. You might have only offered Amazon a small percentage of your range. Start opening that up and widening the products that you have to offer. Interestingly, we've actually spoken with some vendors that have had China sort of saying, do you want to order more inventory? Because China's been impacted by those businesses that have had those closures. So Yeah, it's interesting. It depends really a lot of the time where you have your product manufactured. But again, it's this whole thing of where you've got to be creative with when you're faced with challenges like this, and think about what's your setup and what are all your options, and lay them down on the table and think, well, we don't have loads of options, so what's the best possible option right now for us?
Yeah, yeah. The guest I had last week on the show said something similar. The best tip I can give you is like, be flexible and
Yeah,
be adaptable.
yeah,
This is the one tip that is working for everyone, right?
yeah.
That is going to help everyone. Have you? So one of the challenges that I heard about as well from vendors that are seeing outsized success these days is that there's an increasing problem of hijackers jumping on the listing and selling old products, secondhand products, fake products, whatever this is, because suddenly those products are in huge demand, right? And people are trying to piggy bank and take advantage of this. Is this something that you've seen as well?
We haven't seen it that much. I don't believe as much on the vendor side. I could be wrong, but from conversations that we've had and discussions I've had with groups of vendors, this hasn't sort of jumped up as a problem as of yet. But yeah, I can also see that happening. And there's an interesting thing there, not only with hijackers, but where people have been competing for the buy box almost. It'll be interesting, the dynamics there, because there comes a point where they're competing for the buy box, but everybody's going to have a point of limited supply as well, right? And you might find that everybody starts getting a piece of the pie, and less people start fighting for it, because they know it's almost like their turn will come to clear their inventory.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Well, I'm assuming that this is all gonna last for some more time, right? But yeah, fair enough. I've heard another customer that we work with. So what they did, so they're in the schooling and let's say in the teaching category, and so obviously right now a lot of demand happening there. And so what they did is very interesting. They decided to accelerate the release of new products. So they had new product releases planned for the summertime. And so now as there's such a huge demand, they take advantage to move things forward a little bit and release new products, which I found to be a very, very smart move as well. So taking advantage of the attention that you have right now to release new products.
Yeah, definitely. The biggest challenge as well, another challenge, well, there's lots of challenges, and that's probably the word of the day or the moment, but Amazon is disabling features as well. So there was a point where to sell, everybody was using different features, different strategies to boost sales. It was like Vine program, coupons, Born to Run to help launch products. And then all of a sudden, Amazon has disabled a lot of these features. And so almost now the playing field, or what we're working on, is just a foundation, as in it's very much about demand and supply of getting the product in and getting it to the customer. There are no advertising is still there. So that's still working. And I would not see Amazon necessarily disabling that.
I agree.
But we have, seen Amazon disable a lot to almost calm things. But it's interesting. It's almost like years ago when those tools didn't exist, and it was just selling basically without all these features.
So it goes back to the basics, huh?
Yeah, completely.
Cool. So that's been very insightful, Karina. Thank you for sharing all of this. There are a couple of questions from our attendees today. So Gonzalo, for instance, is asking if it's possible to have a vendor account and a seller account with the same VAT number. I wonder is it allowed by Amazon to have those, to have this hybrid strategy?
That's a good question. Interestingly, depending who you speak with, the answer will be yes or no.
Right.
We've actually had it where vendors have actually worked with Amazon, and Amazon have recommended a hybrid.
Right.
Down because of the product category that they're in. In a clothing category, it made sense to have some products in some more unique sizes on the seller, that
Right.
Amazon didn't want to invest in, and keep the rest, the core products, on the vendor. But at the same time, we've had some vendors who have that conversation with Amazon, and Amazon say, no, you can't have both. And this is in, we deal with North America, we deal with Europe. And so we see it's almost a case by case basis, and Amazon look at it, and Amazon will always look at it as in what's right for the customer, as in why have a hybrid? What's your objective to having a hybrid? Is your objective to start competing with your listings on vendor, on price, to bring down price, or to bring up price? And is it that kind of strategy? Because that's definitely a no. Or is it the fact that there are products that just can't be listed on vendor, but they're products that customers want, and Amazon can't purchase them because Amazon might see them as not profitable for them. But at the same time, Amazon doesn't want their customer losing out, because it's all about customer experience. So that's when seller comes into play. So there's no right or wrong answer. We talk with many vendor managers. There is so much case by case as well. And so, yeah, every Amazon vendor manager seems to have a different stance.
Yeah, Tracy is also sharing that it worked in Amazon.com, so in the US, but it didn't work. No, it did work in the US, but it worked in Europe, right? So it's I've made the same experience, that it really comes down to a case by case decision. I've seen vendors get very creative to create a separate legal entity to then essentially run the seller account through another legal entity. So I think it's very creative. I think that overall, I'm under the impression that Amazon has become a bit more relaxed over the last 12 months. So I think it's also going back and forth a little bit on the time. I think the more visible the brand is in a category, the more difficult it will be to do this, right? Yeah. So if you're a smaller, lesser known brand in a specific category, I think it will be easier.
And there's another thing also, it really does depend a lot of the time on your setup. Are you a pure wholesaler where you're selling to Walmart, you're selling to Tesco and all of that? Because that is when Amazon want you to have a very strong position on the vendor side, because your business is set up in that way.
Right.
But yeah, a lot is whether or not you're under their radar.
So another question that we had from Tracy: the search term reports and brand analytics show insane fluctuations in terms over the course of the last 4 weeks as people adapt to working from home. How do Amazon categorize what is high priority product? Do they go off searches or glance views, page detail views? Any insights into this? How Amazon determines the high priority? Say probably a mix, right?
Yeah, I think it's a mix. Amazon are looking at data. Well, first off, they looked at categories, but interestingly, some products were going through the hoop because some products were incorrectly categorized, and so it was a very generic stance, really, because that's assuming that the catalog is products are cleanly categorized, which they're not necessarily. But high priority was very much on how they deemed essentials, but now it seems to be different in the fact of what are customers looking at. And a lot of that will be down to what in an Amazon term is more glance views, detailed page views, understanding what products customers are actually looking at.
Yeah, agree. Sarah is asking, what would be your advice for the future so vendors would avoid such similar cases? So essentially cases where no POs are coming in, and then you're out of it.
Yeah, and that's a great question, because it is about, this has happened. It almost puts you in a position as how can we plan for the future if this happens again? Yeah. And a lot of it is down to this whole contingency and having a backup supply, as in, if you haven't got a seller account, could you look into a seller account? Or those examples, and Tracy, you mentioned that's been possible in one country and not in the other. That's then thinking about, well, are there other alternates to supply, as in, are there companies that could be a reseller as a backup for us? Or do we set up direct fulfillment up on vendor. It's just looking at all those different other channels to get that product to the end consumer. And it might not be to necessarily consistently implement that, but it's always good to have a backup. So yeah.
So essentially already create the seller account, have the direct to consumer ready if possible, or at least work with a couple of distributors so that you can, if a situation like this comes again, you can just increase the volume that you send to a distributor, not need to start from scratch again, right? So I think it's essentially all the things that you mentioned before. It's just about setting them up and having them ready. That I think that's the best way how to avoid this in the future, right? So
yeah.
Okay, then what else do we have? So Steve has an interesting question. So he's a reseller who can help vendors to sell. So how does he find the vendors that are currently having issues? Well, I don't know. Maybe make a landing page and rank on Google, right? I'm sure that there will be a bunch of folks. Is there a way to see vendors on Amazon? Yes, there is, but you cannot see the vendor how many POs they get, right? So that's if Tracy says that he would like to be introduced to Steven. So Steve, so maybe you can just give us a website so I can mention it here for the audience.
And Steven, there is actually, there's a vendor group on LinkedIn as well, an Amazon vendor group out there. So there are some groups out there where vendors could be looking out for that. So LinkedIn might be a good option as well, to be able to offer that hand. As I say, we also have Vendor Society, so feel free to drop me an email, because you never know who's out there that's looking for that as well.
So Steve says selfcareplus.com. Selfcare plus, no blanks, no nothing. Selfcareplus.com. So yeah, good.
There we go. There's the announcement for all those vendors that are watching.
Exactly. Shout out, right? So I think that's part of the role that we see here, right? Is facilitating those contacts and bringing people together to help out each other in these situations, right? So that's for this. And then let me just see Scott complaining that AMS Mexico had screwed something up and now they cannot talk to anyone. I mean, that's a typical Amazon problem. Any way to get in touch with a human at Amazon? Probably not really, right? If you don't have a contact, it's hard.
No, unfortunately not. It becomes, to be honest, on the advertising side, it should be a lot easier than trying to contact a vendor manager, in all honesty. So there should be somebody on the advertising team. Usually they're a lot more responsive, but yeah, who knows, unfortunately.
So what I've seen is it depends quite a bit on your ad spend. So if you, let's say, spend 10K plus a month, then you typically already have a point of contact. And if not, it is quite difficult to get in touch, right? And then Tracy again asking about if you have direct to consumer dropshipping enabled, what is the time frame to expect for the brand's legal department and accountings to have all this up and running? It's very hard to say. It really depends on your company, but in my experience, we talk about a couple of weeks, months, right? It's not a matter of a few days, right? Sometimes even years, right? So I think it's more of a midterm thing. It's not necessarily a short-term thing. Yeah, let me put it this way.
Yeah, exactly. And direct fulfillment, and if you do it on the vendor side, direct fulfillment, it can take a few months because of Amazon have to go away and do their setup, check things. They come back in a few weeks, and then you've then got to set up. So we have seen it's not something you can just switch on and it's available the next day. It does require, at least 4 weeks, I would say, to get set up. Although we have heard some success stories, but yeah, it's better to set expectations that it takes longer.
Over deliver, right? Under promise, over deliver.
Exactly.
Karina, that was great. It's been a long session, 50 minutes already. Thank you for sharing all of this. If someone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do this?
To drop us an email. If you go to our website, which is ecommercenurse.com, you go to contact us and just drop us a message. And if you want to speak to me personally, just sort of say, hi, Karina, and I'll jump on that message. And then we're there to assist with any any questions that you may have that you weren't able to cover off today.
Is this also how they can find Vendor Society? So the vendor community, is that on Vendor Nurse, on e-commerce nurse as well?
Yeah, so there's e-commerce nurse, which is our main sort of, I say bread and butter, our agency or the parent company. And for those that are interested in the vendor community, you just go to vendorsociety.com and you just sign up as a member. There's no charge or anything. It's free to be part of the community. You just need to be an active vendor. And so if you're an active vendor, sign up and then you'll be part of our mailing list and you'll roundtables as well.
That's great. So I've heard a lot of positive feedback around the community, specifically also from some of our customers, right? So I'm happy to recommend it here. Go and check it out, ecommercenurse.com and vendorsociety.com. Thanks again, Karina, for sharing all of this. So essentially, if you're suffering from low POs at this point, either try to set up or try to go direct to consumer yourself if you can, if you already have the setup in place. If not, there are a bunch of distributors that have such an infrastructure in place, so you can go there. And if you can't do any of those two things, then they use the time to analyze Amazon and to understand what's been working, what hasn't been working, and do some housekeeping essentially, where you can optimize your listing, set up PPC campaigns, and so on, right? And if you're on the other side, we're getting too many POs. It's about getting creative and solving the supply problems and solving the personnel problems to handle all of this, right? So I think that's those are the key takeaways, right? Thank you very much again for everyone attending. Next week we will have a session around advertising, specifically in times of Corona. We've been seeing a lot of very interesting developments on the advertising side in the past couple of weeks. CPC is going up, CPC is going down, ad spend up, ad spend down. So it's been a few very busy weeks. So tune in again next Thursday at the same time. It's what is it, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, or 6 p.m. in Central Europe, right? So tune in again for the next episode next week. And then, if you want to find out more about Corona, we have on our website, Sellics.com, you'll find a dedicated Corona page where we have all the analysis, all the surveys, and so on that we've been doing around Corona. We hope to help you manage through those intense times, and we hope that this is going to be over as soon as possible. Okay, thank you very much, Karina.
Thank you everyone.
See you next time. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.